when it works well and when we design it well, people don't think about it. Is when it doesn't, if something breaks, that you get the headlines. And we're trying to shift it to actually getting everybody to understand the importance of highways and transport for the economy. Also, how we then use that to decarbonise, because it has huge potential.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Sue Percy, Chief Executive of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, sometimes known as CIHT, a professional body at the forefront of shaping how we move people and goods in a safe, sustainable, and accessible way. Under Sue's leadership, CIHT has championed a bold, values-led strategy that places climate action, equity, and professional ethics at the heart of transport infrastructure and mobility planning. I was eager to have Sue back on the podcast to hear how her approach of combining ambition with pragmatism has played out over the past 2 years. Sue, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, or I should say, welcome back.
Thanks very much, and it's great to be back.
Just maybe to set the scene, could you give us a sense of what CIHT is today, how big it is in terms of members, the areas you focus on, and to some extent how the institution's been evolving?
So CIHT, we are a thriving, inclusive professional body, and we have over 12,500 individual members, but we also have organisational members. We have a partner network of both private, public sector, research community, education community, who are also in our organisations, so that we have quite a wide reach in terms of those that we represent. And it's those professionals who are working in highways and transportation, particularly in infrastructure and services. So those that sort of plan, design, the engineering sort of side through to transport planning and policy and innovation. So we span the sort of infrastructure delivery, digital transformation, inclusive design, behaviour, sustainable mobility, and anything that sort of falls within that sort of highways and transport sector we are involved with. And we also now have the Bus Centre of Excellence. So it's not just about the infrastructure and services, it's also including modes of transport and how we support those who work in the bus sector, for example, and those who are using buses as transport that they use every day, or some people use every day. So we're quite wide-ranging and growing in all those areas.
I'm sure it's something you think about a lot, but it's really struck me just as you went through that, how so many of the issues that we're grappling with today as a country, maybe as a species, come together around transportation and logistics. It's just really interesting.
I mean, I always think of highways and transportation as a sort of unsung hero, because we all use transport and highways from the cradle to the grave, whether that's moving from home to work or home to visit family, or the goods that you order on the internet getting to your front door. So it's absolutely the glue that keeps society and the economy, going. It really is. And often it's seen just as, well, it's always there, and people don't necessarily think about it, apart from if there's something like a delay or they're stuck in traffic. But actually our highways and transportation are sort of the lifebug, the pulse of society and the economy, that actually when it works well and when we design it well, people don't think about it. Is when it doesn't, if something breaks, that you get the headlines. And we're trying to shift it to actually getting everybody to understand the importance of highways and transport for the economy. Also, how we then use that to decarbonise, because it has huge potential to actually help us think about net zero, get to net zero, and also just that sort of social inclusion, I think, so people and communities are less excluded If you've got good transport links, you can get to work, you can meet people, you can get to the doctors or the hospital, you can get those things delivered to you. So for me, it's such an important, part of having a thriving community, having a thriving society.
Something, again, I suspect it's second nature to you, but I'll admit I'm just slightly vaguer on it than I'd like to be, and maybe one or two people listening are. What does it mean to be a chartered institution? What does that word chartered bring to the party?
As a chartered institution, we are constituted, first of all, as a charity, but also we have a charter from the Privy Council that is about standards and the way that we have to operate. So it's something that you are conferred once you have met certain standards. And within that, that allows us to be able to set standards, to be able to have a chartered title. Our Transport Planning Professional Charter is a chartered title, so that's a professional qualification. And equally, it allows us to be able to not only have standards, but the way that we operate. It gives us a sense of the things that we can do and not do. It gives us sort of like the guidelines or the boundaries in which we operate. So it's very important to us as a standard of how we operate, how we're constituted, and allows us to deliver chartered, titled professional qualifications as well.
I mean, clearly you've got a very strong sense of purpose as an organization. How does that end up shaping the strategy? How does all that actually work in practice?
I think having a strong sort of purpose is critical, because I think we all coalesce around that. We're very clear about what that purpose is, and very importantly, the values that underpin that. And so when we developed our strategy, we obviously included and collaborated and asked for the voice of our members, key stakeholders and partners to build into that, and got a huge amount of consensus about the things that we wanted to advance, whether that was around the sustainable transport agenda, being inclusive, being very collaborative, progressive and professional. But we then define those as sort of values, which actually are the core of how we operate. So it's not just what do we do, it's the how and why we do things, which actually is so critical to our culture, our behaviours, and how I think people then start to own things and really want to drive them forward. So it's not about, well, we will deliver X and Y, that's part of it, but it's the values that actually is very much our identity, and how we sort of, I suppose, feel to people, and why members want to be part of it and why members want to stay part of it. And so it sort of goes beyond the sort of transactional sort of things and becomes part of someone's sort of behaviour and ownership as well as culture. And that's through both staff and in with our members and partners as well. And we do expect all of our partners, our members and staff to actually live those values. It's not something that's on a page. You have to live those values as well. And I think that sort of really is very helpful, and it allows us to move forward on things, I think, with much more consensus and more determination as well. So it's been really, really helpful. And I think it's allowed us to therefore then pick up on sort of the themes that we have, 3 themes around climate action, equality and diversity and inclusion, and about professionalism as well. And those sort of cut across everything that we do. And we have to sort of be accountable for those 3 themes as well, whether we're doing something around road safety, whether that's something to do with the maintenance agenda or the way that our boards and panels operate. So those 3 themes have to be picked up, and we're accountable to that. And my board of trustees expects that to be demonstrated in the way that it scrutinises and monitors and looks at the things that the organisation's doing.
And, as chief executive, what have you found in there to be the most challenging or stretching, either for you personally or for the organisation as a whole? I mean, if you can, maybe you could think of an example of where that crystallised and how you dealt with it.
I think sometimes The EDI agenda can be very challenging because we are all at different stages of that, individually, organisationally, and professionally, I think. And I think it's around thinking about it now being about how do we deliver inclusive services? How do we deliver things that everybody will benefit rather than thinking about one particular, perhaps protected characteristic, even though those are very important. We've just published something called Creating a Public Realm for All. So it doesn't pick out, creating a public realm for X or Y, it's for all. And I think it's a different way of thinking about it. But that can be challenging because actually you have to look at things from a different perspective, not your own perspective. And how will that impact perhaps if you have a visual impairment, for example, or something else. So it's really thinking in a different way. But that's what we're trying to sort of embed so that it's sort of part of the things that we do rather than, we must think about doing that. And so it's not an add-on, it just gets embedded in what we do. But it's also about then taking members with you on that journey, giving them the tools, the skills, the knowledge to work that through as well, because people pick up on these things at different times and different pace as well. And of course you have, constraints, whether that's financial constraints on you, they're trying to deliver a project and they've got time constraints. And so it's about, it's not just a one-off thing, it's just about embedding that and equipping us all so that actually when we do think about planning things or designing things or delivering things, the EDI agenda is part of that from the start to the finish. And not sort of trying to think about it further down the line, thinking, we should have done that because actually that will allow a certain group in the community to be able to cross that junction better. So that has been quite challenging and it's still work in progress. But, I think we've made good progress. I think the sector's made good progress. That's not to say we can't do more. That's always going to be, I think, something that we have to keep a focus on.
Yeah. So a difficult question. Maybe even more so, in the kind of organization you're leading. How do you measure progress when it comes to things like that? Because it seems like it's both how you and the people who work directly with you and for you, kind of how they behave, but then also the broader profession. How do you measure progress against all that?
I think it's about being able to demonstrate it in the work that we do, even if it's quite subtle as well, because some of this is about not only putting things in schemes or in standards or in good practice guidelines, but it's actually about the conversations and the behaviours and the cultures. So it's very much about how we approach things as well, what we are delivering. So you can start to see it and measure it when, for example, you look at some of the things that we celebrate, whether that's through schemes or individuals and the awards. So we have a big CIHT awards annually, as well as our regions and nations often have awards within their areas as well. And it's about being able to showcase things and celebrate things where you can see it demonstrably in there, as well as celebrating people. So it's really important we celebrate initiatives and projects, but also the people. And for me, it's also around the leadership of the organisation, particularly around my board of trustees, about what they're doing, what they're promoting, what they're championing, what they're advocating as well. So you can have some more quantifiable KPIs that you can measure, but it's often the qualitative things that you need to look at as well. Beyond that, it's about when we get asked to get involved with partners, with governments, with stakeholders, to sit on some of their groups or panels so that our voice can be part of that influencing as well. And of course, that is always difficult to measure. If anyone's got good ideas of how you measure influence, then please drop me a line. But it's also how you have that influence, soft influence in different ways as well. And of course, we get asked to be involved in lots of different things with lots of different bodies. And as much as we can, we do that because we see that as part of really helping to set the sort of culture change agenda and sort of do that sort of transformation, which is always a journey. It's not a destination. Being clear about what it is you stand for, but also having clarity on the way that you communicate that as well.
You've talked here and elsewhere about the importance of, sort of climate and sustainability. As you've been taking that forward, what have been some of the trade-offs you've had to navigate? As you know, as most people know, that's not a topic that everybody agrees, even what the issue is, much less what the solution is.
Very much so. I think if you look at climate and climate action, which we've been very much pushing on, you get lots of different views and opinions because we're a reflection of individuals, we're a reflection of society as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges is sort of balancing, because we've got the challenge of moving to net zero over a relatively short period of time, is that sort of trying to embed that over sort of a longer term when you've got really short-term pressures, where those pressures could be funding constraints, or they could be political cycles or different regional priorities. And you've got all that mix going on, you've got shifts going on, you've still got to try and keep on that pathway to net zero, for example. And we've just sort of produced something called our Climates Report, which is basically about doubling down on how we sort of really think about our role, what we can contribute to that as a professional body, as a sector. And within that, that's holding government to account, for example, on the things that they've set, really sort of working with them to see how can we accelerate movement on that. It's actually understanding what our role is as a professional body, because we can't do everything and we shouldn't be trying to do everything. And we've really focused on things like making sure our members have got the right skills and the knowledge and the competencies to be able to deliver on that. So we're doing a lot of investment in our digital learning platforms, in what we expect from CPD on standards, for example. And then working with our partners, the sector has got to really embrace that challenge and really take it forward as well. And so we very much want to collaborate with others and support them on their journeys. So it's really having a clear purpose of where you're trying to get to, but understanding that we can't do everything and being very clear where we're expecting others, hopefully, to step up and take the lead on things. And one of the key issues, I think, is how we communicate this agenda as well, because I think for many people it just gets lost in their daily lives of, can they afford this, are their jobs secure and all these other things. But I think it's really incumbent on us to tell that story and that storytelling about why it's so important, so that actually you can get around, that you have resilient networks, transport networks, that you can move around, that this is important not only now but also for the future as well. So it's a complicated matrix, but we're being very clear that we have 7 recommendations within our Climates Report of things that we want to take forward, either lead on or work with others to deliver. And you have to look at it as something that is ongoing. If you're going to get there, you've just got to have that energy, you've got to have that drive, you've also got to have that commitment that you will get there, and hopefully provide opportunities and solutions where you can to allow others to take things forward as well, because it can be quite overwhelming, I think. And I think breaking things down into bite-sized things that you can actually see progress on, I think, is really important as well.
Out of the 7 recommendations, I suspect it's one of those things where officially you can't have a favorite. But out of the 7, is there one that's your favorite? One that, you feel really kind of demonstrates what you're trying to do?
The one that I think we naturally align to is around development of skills and knowledge, because the green skills agenda, the net zero agenda, the decarbonisation agenda is so important. And we just assume that we've got the right skills in the right place to be able to do this. And everywhere I go, whether it's the energy sector, the wider construction sector, they're all saying the same things. They haven't got the right skills. They haven't got enough people coming into the sector to deliver on this. So for me, this is absolutely core to what professional bodies are about. And it's really about making sure that we get enough people coming into our sector to be able to deliver in the future, to make sure that they feel it's attractive, to make sure they understand. Goes back to the start of the conversation, what do we do? It's not about, we're going to maintain a road, or we're going to have a transport hub or something like that. It's about moving people around. It's about what it does for society and the economy, and making sure that we can make it a really vibrant sector that people want to join, but have the right skills, whether they're coming into it or already into it and need to upskill. Because I, like everybody else, have to do that as well, because innovation is so rapid. The pressures on what we have to do are increasing all the time. And you just have to keep on making sure that you have got the skills and the knowledge and the competence to be able to deliver. Because ultimately, as a charity, we have to deliver public benefit through our members and what our members do. And that is so central. And you can only do that if you're on this continuous learning path. And, you stand still, you've lost it, really. You've just got to keep moving. And that's why CIHT does have an ambitious agenda, because we know we've got to keep on pushing hard and moving forward, so that we can deliver the right things for our communities as well.
I want to come back to that ambition in a second, but one of the things you've talked about there is sort of how everything's changing, and it seems I just can't let that go by without mentioning AI. And I'm sure in some ways it's like, oh, do we really have to do this again? But curious how you see AI changing both the profession, but also changing CIHT as an organization.
It's a conversation you have virtually daily, I think. And in terms of the sector, we've done quite a lot of work already on how AI is being used in the sector and how it can be used going forward. And so, again, a lot of our role is that we're not experts in AI ourselves, but it's actually about sharing that knowledge, showing what's going on, helping to support the right skills so that the people that are coming in to our sector also have the skills that they can embrace AI and use it and really think about it in terms of whether that's about pothole detection, for example, whether that's around how we design things, how we operate things, how we get information back from road surfaces to know if there's going to be a maintenance issue, bridge structures, and so on. So you can see how this is going to evolve and is evolving. And for us as a professional membership body, of course, it's going to affect how we work, what we do, what we don't do. And certainly for my colleagues here, I always talk about AI as a really useful tool. It's not a replacement for individuals, it's a tool to aid us to do our roles, so that actually there's some roles that maybe are perhaps more repetitive that actually AI can do more effectively than us, but it never ever replaces professional judgment. And it doesn't replace that sort of, collaboration space that is so, so important to what we do. So I see it as a way of actually letting us do more things without having to just expand our workforce and continuously do that. But you have to be smart with it and you have to know what you want from it as well. We've just started a digital transformation project at the institution, and AI will be built in right from the start as we move forward. And I think it's something that some colleagues really embrace and are excited about. Some are perhaps maybe not sure about it, and others feel quite threatened by it. And I think my role is to actually make sure people feel secure in the roles that they have, understanding that actually things will evolve. But what I'm looking from them are the human skills and things that they bring, and let AI help us to do process-driven things, which actually they don't need to do, and we can move them on to other things which perhaps are more rewarding to them professionally.
I said I wanted to come back to ambition. When you look ahead, let's say to 2030, what do you think the changes it needs to make? What are the shifts it needs to make?
I think for the sector, 2030 isn't that far away, actually, to be perfectly honest. And when you're looking at things like infrastructure, you've got a lot of things that are already embedded in that because of the investment and the timescales as well. But for me particularly, it's around how we move into that net zero position and how far we get by 2030. And I think there's going to be things that will accelerate and other things that take us longer than we think, but being very clear on that. It will be about probably more data-driven, people-centered working. So to bring in all that sort of new technology, but really about thinking, it is about individuals, for people, for communities, for society. And that needs to be even more central to what we're doing. And I think it's also about making sure our networks are more resilient to the climate change that is happening, but not only our networks, but our workforce as well. I think resilience is such an important thing, and people often talk about it as, we'll need resilience in highways and transport. But for me, it's also about a resilient workforce, which I hope is more diverse and more inclusive. And I think that then drives in more innovation, more creative thinking, and you get all that benefits from that as well. And I think it will also have to be around skilling up and new skills. That's a critical shift. And I think probably is to embrace innovation. And there's always that tension between innovation and trialing things and risk. And we're going to have to think about how we're going to manage that, because I think as a sector, we can be very risk averse for very good reason, but actually sometimes we're going to have to loosen that a bit and move forward. So that sort of transformation will be needed, and we're going to have to accelerate that between now and 2030 more than perhaps we've ever done in the past.
One thing you haven't mentioned, talking to other chief execs of professional bodies, particularly for some reason chartered ones, they're often thinking international. And sometimes they already have a fairly significant part of their membership not in the UK. What does that look like for you?
For us, we've just reviewed last year our international strategy, thinking about what does international mean for CIHT. And of course, we have members in, I think it's about over 80 different countries. And a lot of what we do isn't, climate change, for example, air pollution doesn't stop at national boundaries. And so, for us, in terms of the resources and the services, they have to be applicable for our members wherever they geographically happen to be. We actually have 4 international hubs, as it were, and that those are expanding. So we've got a hub in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, UAE, and also in the Republic of Ireland. And certainly our work is being much more looking outwards as well, to learn from international expertise, as well as sharing what we have as well. And we've got quite a growing membership in other countries as well. So our international agenda is expanding. We've put more resource into it in terms of having staff support as well. And I've literally just come back with my president from a visit to Malaysia and to Hong Kong. And if I just think about Hong Kong, talking to colleagues there and looking at some of the projects they're delivering and the innovation that they're bringing into construction and the way that they operate some of their services is incredible. And we're actually bringing someone over shortly who's going to then do some webinars here to do that knowledge transfer as well. If you want sustainable urbanisation, and you want people to be able to have good opportunities to employment, then you've got to have good, sustainable transport networks. So I suppose we sort of see it as a natural extension of what we do, not only with our members, but also as part of that international community, how we feed into that, how we support that, how we learn as well. So yeah, international is an important aspect of the things that we do.
It's sort of almost taking the thing and going the other way. How does the whole sort of devolution, regional transport, all that, how does that agenda fit into what you're doing?
We have regional groups anyway and regional committees that actually work with whatever devolution agenda there is at any time. So of course, at the moment, devolution is happening very rapidly, and we look at it as opportunity because it's getting closer to the communities that we need to serve, and the areas are sort of defining what they need in terms of transport and highways for their populations. And of course, our members work for many of the mayoral setups, the combined authorities, and also for the transport boards as well. So again, we must make sure that with our policy work, with our technical work we provide, that it covers all of those things so that it's something for everybody. And I think devolution, it opens up other things for all of us actually. So in terms of our engagement, that means we're engaging much more with mayors, for example, understanding what their priorities are, what their constraints are, what they need from us as a sector, what they need from us as a membership body to help support them to deliver their political agendas as well. But always being very clear that we are a professional body, that we will provide professional advice and make sure our members have the right skills to deliver that for you. But actually, we will also professionally and appropriately challenge where we think actually things aren't appropriate. So it is about being that, I suppose, that critical friend that's trusted, because we're going to give straightforward professional advice. And sometimes that advice might be sort of saying, there will be issues if you go down that particular path, but it's actually being very transparent and honest about that. And also saying where we think that's a really good idea, we will support you on that as well.
Well, I suppose the other slightly tangential thought that brings up, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, is just the extent to which you collaborate with other professional bodies or other, think tanks, policy units, whatever. How does all that network work?
I think it's being very clear about when you collaborate on a particular issue that you have in common and where you think you can actually add value, because we're all busy. There's no point in collaborating where actually you're not going to add any value to something, because it's not helpful to those you're collaborating with, or vice versa. So it's being very clear about if there is another organisation that, for example, is taking forward an issue around climate, for example, or resilience, that are actually, we think this is really important. We will collaborate, we will endorse, we will support, showcase, we will make sure our members are aware of. So it's been just very clear, collaboration is a really, really good thing, but let's be smart about it. Let's not duplicate our effort where others are doing something where we have an interest. If they're already doing it, let's get behind them and add support to that. But also understand where the gaps are and where we can actually fill those gaps or bring others in to help support that. So we do collaborate with a number of organisations regularly, but we're very clear, I don't want to duplicate on things, that we have to add value and it has to be the right thing for us to get involved with. I think one of the challenges for professional bodies and chartered bodies is when to say no. And I think all of us like to say yes, that's interesting, or let's get involved in that. And I think the key is also knowing when it's okay to say no to something. We can't just keep doing more and more and more. We have to know what is absolutely central to our purpose and then be able to sort of say no to other things, because everything's potentially interesting. And you can get so diluted that actually you then don't really deliver on what you're trying to do. So I think that is something that all of us, whether it's in transport or any sort of part of the membership community, you have to be very, very aware of. And even if it's unpopular sometimes, you have to be, have that courage to say, no, this isn't central to what we're doing. This isn't really delivering on our purpose. So we won't be doing that, even though we think it's very interesting. And that is quite a difficult thing to do sometimes.
Yeah. One question that might take us into a slightly difficult topic, but I'm sure you're robust enough for it. And that's the question of standards. I know professional bodies often talk a lot about standards and raising standards and all of that. But how do you deal with the situation where one of your members hasn't actually lived up to what you'd expect? Obviously that's not something I suspect that happens very often, but it also seems like a very tricky topic. How does the organization deal with those situations?
As with everything, these things do occur. And we're very clear that if you are a member of CIHT, you have to comply with our code of professional conduct, whether that is behaviour, whether that's about the way that you operate, what you do, etc. There are very clear statements about what is expected and how you should operate. And if a complaint comes in from maybe the public or from another member, or we discover something going on, then we have a very clear process which we take the member through, sort out the facts from the fiction to make sure that the member has every opportunity to explain something. And then that goes to our professional conduct panel which also has a layperson on it from another professional background, so that it's not members just judging members. And then depending on what the issue, what the evidence is, what the facts are, then there's different sanctions that can be dealt out. So it can go from, actually we don't think there is a breach, but actually there's some advice that we would like to offer, to there is a breach and then a warning and expel people from membership. We take things like that very seriously, because if you lose public trust because of your members' behaviours, for example, then you're on a very slippery slope. Being a member of some organisation like CIHT, there are very clear standards of professional behaviour and there are sanctions. Public trust in professionals has waned over the years, and particularly things like Grenfell. I think people just think, well, they're just doing anything they like. And actually being in a professional body where you can actually sort of say, no, I am held to account, I have a code of professional conduct that I have to adhere to, I think is really important to rebuild public trust, to actually understand what it means to be a professional. You have to also sometimes be prepared to say, no, that's not acceptable, rather than going down a formal sort of conduct route. But you also have to say that's not acceptable behaviour because it's not professional, or actually you could have dealt with that in a far better way. And being prepared to say that, and also being prepared to ask people to leave an event if actually you think they're not maybe one of your members or a guest, but actually their behaviour doesn't sit with what is now expected. And I think we all have a duty to do that. Whether that's me as a chief executive, whether it's my board of trustees or my council members or anybody, we all have a responsibility to make sure everybody feels included in an event. And that inclusion means behaviours have to be different to perhaps how they were maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah. Sue, I think that's actually a great note to end on. So thank you for that. Thank you for rejoining us and coming back and sort of giving us an update. And perhaps sometime down the road, we might get a further update.
It's a pleasure speaking to you, and also really a pleasure sometimes just reflecting on the journey that we're on, because it's not ended and we keep pushing forward. So it's great to just have some time to reflect on that as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.